In this video I've made a fantasy elvish edit which actually came out really beautiful, and I was not expecting that because I've been away for a while and I was feeling kinda rusty, but in the end the final result really exceeded my expectation and I was quite surprised and really happy. So the idea was to make a scene with elf riding a horse in the middle of this beautiful forest with a really good sunlight, animals and all the other good stuff. If you like videos like this and want to see a lot more Photoshop content, make sure to subscribe and like this video because I'm finally back on YouTube and I got really cool content coming in the future, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. So without further ado, let's begin. So first I searched for a lot of forest pictures to build this perfect fantasy forest for my character, and then I started to cut out the main character using the pen tool. I always use the pen tool because you can go in as much detail as you want. It is more time consuming, but the final result is always better than the quick selection tools. After I finished cutting out the main character, I dropped a picture of this forest. In this one I'm gonna use the ground and remove the top part. I removed the top part using mask and a normal brush because there was not much detail here. I dropped another picture of a forest, and in this one I like this rock in the front. This is gonna help me create the depth of field. I dropped another picture of a forest. I liked the tree on the left side in this one. What I'm doing right now is I'm putting all these pictures together without editing, so it would be easier to move them around. Once I build the solid base image that I like, I'll start adding shadows, highlights and all the other good stuff. I duplicated and stretched the image of this tree so it would reach the top part, and I dropped another tree picture on the right side. Here again I'm using mask and normal brush because the shape is not that complex, so it is easier to do it this way. The foreground was looking pretty nice. The only thing left was to add the trees on the sides and mountains in the background. Cutting these trees out was not that hard actually. I did it with a color range and then I fixed the edges with a tree brush. I did exactly the same thing with the same picture on the right side. I finally added the picture of the mountains. I moved it around and I decided to add some more trees on top of that layer to really connect the foreground scene and the mountains. I removed some parts of the sky and used the refine edge brush tool to fully remove the sky, and it did the job perfectly. After I finished connecting the foreground with the background, I started to work on the character by making her ears a bit longer. First I made the shape that I liked and I dropped the reference image of an elf ear and started to add the shadows and highlights on top of that layer. The ear was looking pretty nice, but the hardest part for me was creating the hair because I've never really made hair myself. I drew the shape I liked for the hair and I tried all the brushes I had with low flow to make this work somehow. It was not looking good at first, but after some tries it started to look pretty nice and I was kinda surprised. I know it's not anywhere near to being perfect or being really good, and I know I got a lot to learn, but for the first try I will give this a win for sure. After that I started to remove the purple stuff from her wedding dress because I wanted to make her dress green because I thought that green would look a lot nicer on an elf. After that I started to make quick reflection in the water. I used some Gaussian blur, some smudge tool, I faded the bottom part and finally it started to look pretty nice. I made her dress green by using hue and saturation, and I made the dark parts a lot more darker using exposure and blend if. After that, I started one of the most important things while doing photo manipulation, which is adding the color balance on every picture. By making this, I'm making sure that every picture is in the same color range and none of them look like they do not belong there. With that, I'm adding levels and making sure that the objects in the background are more pale and lighter than the objects in the foreground. This is gonna help the composition to have more depth of field. The overall composition was not looking that bad, so I started to add the shadows with the exposure. I'm just imagining where the light is sitting on an object and adding the shadow on the opposite side. The main light source, which is the sun, is in the middle, so I have to make sure that the trees on the left side will get the shadows on the left side and trees on the right side will get the shadows on the right side. To add really nice shadows, most of the time I use a normal brush with low flow and low opacity. As you see, I'm constantly changing the color balances on the layers because it is not a one-time thing. You find more and more mistakes as you go forward, so it is totally fine to go back and readjust the color balances to your liking. After the overall composition started to look a lot more balanced and nicer, I started to add the animals. It's gonna make the whole composition a lot more alive because I think adding the animals in the forest is pretty important. I cut all the animals out and spread them in different parts of the image. After I finally added everything, I added the main light source and started to add highlights on every object. Mostly I'm adding light with exposure or levels and painting the highlights with normal brush tool. Trees have a lot of bumps, so if you want to add the highlights and remove the light from the black parts, you can add the blend if, which does exactly that. You can also do that with shadows. It really saves you a lot of time because you do not have to remove the highlights from the black parts one at a time, and it is actually amazing. I forgot to fix the saturation on layers. Some of them had a lot more saturation than the others, so I fixed that as well and it started to look a lot better. I also decided to add some fog in the composition, and to do that you have to create white solid color, decrease the opacity and paint on it with a cloud brush. I returned the animals on the composition and did the exact same thing that I did with trees, which is adding color balance, vibrance, shadows and highlights. After that I decided to add some kind of paint on an elf's face, and I did that by using hue and saturation layer. I just doodled around and I think it came out pretty nice. Finally I added the camera raw filters. I probably changed everything and this is the final result. I'm really happy with the final result. I think it does look like a fantasy elvish forest, which is exactly what I wanted, and considering that I haven't edited for almost 2 months, I'm definitely proud with what I made. It seemed scary to edit this after such a long break, but I'm glad that I managed to do a pretty good job. If you liked this video and want to see a lot more new Photoshop content coming very soon, make sure to subscribe and like this video, and I hope I'll see you in the next one.